Hello and welcome to Rao's IAS Focus Weekly. Today on 10th of April 2025, I'll be covering the current affairs of the related to the subject of science and technology in the past 1 week. I'll be covering the current affairs in the subject of science from the date of 3rd of April 2025 till 9th of April 2025. These are the topics that I'm going to cover. I have also covered some of the topics which were popular in the last week, because in the last week I couldn't cover all of them in one go. So these are the topics that we are going to discuss. So we'll start. The first topic that we are going to take is centrifuge. Centrifuge was in the news in the last 1 week, and we'll talk about it. What is a centrifuge? What is the purpose of the centrifuge? Then we'll talk about the AMoRE experiment. It has been an important experiment regarding the weight of the neutrinos. Then we'll talk about the genetically modified pig liver transplant that was popularly performed in a Chinese university opens a new window of opportunities for, especially for the people who are looking for liver donors. Then we'll talk about the one of the payloads of Chandrayaan 3, which has recently discovered or recently found out the temperature of the moon surface. And then we'll talk about the importance of undersea cables, what is the requirement, why they are important. Then we'll talk about a popular application called CAPTCHA, which is used for prevention of website bots and protecting the websites, protecting our services on the web. Then we'll talk about the de-extinction of dire wolves, which has been a very popular news lately. What is de-extinction, how they have been brought back. And then we'll talk about rare diseases, and we'll talk a little about the national policy on rare diseases. And then lastly, we'll talk about the 128 new moons of Saturn that has been recently discovered, and we'll talk about what has been the name of the observatories from which telescope they have been found out. So let's start with the first topic of our discussion. So the first topic is centrifuge. Now guys, what exactly is a centrifuge? A centrifuge is a very popularly used device in biotechnological, biological, or even chemistry related experiments. A centrifuge is nothing but a device that spins and works by the application of centrifugal force. A centrifugal force is the force that is basically applied on a spinning object, in which any body which is subjected to this force will have a tendency to move away from the center of the from the center of the spin or the center of the curvature, right? So this is basically center of the circle. So this is basically what is a centrifuge, a centrifugal force. Now what is a centrifuge? A centrifuge is a very popularly used device in order to create separations of different types of fluids or different types of gases. I'll give you one example that whenever you talk about a heterogeneous mixture of fluids, like if you talk about air is technically a mixture of various gases, and all these gases have different atomic number, different mass, different atomic mass, and they would essentially have different densities. Similarly, when you talk about the human blood also contains blood plasma, blood cells, and they all have varying densities. So whenever you want to separate any of these things, you can separate it with the help of a centrifuge, right? So first I'll give you an example of how centrifuge works, and then we'll see what exactly is the purpose of centrifuge in this particular news. So when you talk about a centrifuge is basically works on the principle of centrifugal force, like I said. And how and what exactly is the function of centrifuge? So what you will notice that in case of a centrifuge, or in case of, like, if I give you a simple example, when you talk about the traditional methods of making ghee or butter, traditionally how the butter and ghee or butter and cream is separated, or butter and milk is separated, you would remember that there used to be a large container where people would put milk, and then we used to dip a wooden spindle into the milk, and the wooden spindle would have spokes on all the sides, and then you would coil the spindle with some rope, and then when you start pulling the rope one at a time, one and the other alternatively, you can see the spindle churning, you can see the spindle spinning. And as the spindle starts spinning, after making multiple rounds, you will notice that the denser part of the milk will start getting accumulated to the center, and the lighter part of the milk will go to the periphery. Now this is a very simple example of centrifugation, where we use the centrifugal force in order to separate fluids of different densities. We all know like milk contains milk solids, milk fats, which are supposed to be denser than skimmed milk, and skimmed milk can be stretched towards the periphery. Skimmed is basically the milk that does not have any fat, and the denser part of the milk gets accumulated to the center. So this separation of fluids or different densities is what is known as centrifugation. Now the centrifugation process can be done in two ways. Centrifugation could be performed in two ways. One is liquid and the other one is gaseous centrifugation. In the case of liquid centrifugation, when you put any different composition of liquids in a centrifuge, you will notice that the denser part of the liquid will accumulate at the center, and the lighter part of the liquid will go to the periphery. Lighter part will spread out to the periphery. This is what happens in the case of liquid centrifugation. But when you put a composition of various gases in the centrifuge, you will see that in case of gas centrifugation, the lighter part of the gases will accumulate at the center and the denser part will accumulate to the periphery. Right? The periphery is occupied by the denser part. So this is the fundamental difference between liquid and gas centrifugation. Although both the centrifugation works on the same principle, but the differentiation of the substances is opposite in case of liquids and gases. Why it is so? It is mainly because of a concept called shearing stress and compressive stress. Normally I don't talk about it because it is not very important from the context of UPSC, but if any one of you comes from science background, they may be knowing that in the case of liquids, the shearing stress is never transferred. Right? Compressive stress can be transferred, but shearing stress never gets transferred. Whereas in the gas, it can be transferred. So mainly because of these features, the gas and liquid centrifugation processes are almost the opposite to each other, but technically they both are working on the same principle. Right? So when it comes to nuclear fuel, now what is the purpose of knowing centrifuge under uranium enrichment? So when you talk about uranium, or when you talk about nuclear energy is basically produced from the strong nuclear force released from uranium, right? It is from the strong nuclear force that is often released from the uranium nucleus. And how do we produce it? We produce it with the help of nuclear fission. We bombard a high-speed neutron onto uranium and the uranium splits, producing a lot of energy. But when it comes to the production of energy, it's not like any uranium can produce energy. We require a certain enriched uranium. We require a certain percentage of fissile fuel. Fissile fuel is that fuel which can undergo a nuclear chain reaction. And to achieve that percentage of fissile fuel, we have to enrich the uranium. Actually, guys, when you talk about naturally occurring uranium, uranium is mostly made up of two isotopes, uranium-235. Both of them have same atomic number, isotopes, and uranium-238. But out of the two isotopes of uranium-238 happens to be 99.3% in composition, and uranium-235 is just 0.7% in composition, and together they both make natural uranium. Together they both are naturally occurring. Right? Now 0.7% of uranium-235, actually this is the fuel that can undergo nuclear fission. So when it comes to producing nuclear energy, we actually require uranium-235. For producing nuclear energy, we require uranium-235 for that. And unfortunately, the naturally occurring percentage is just 0.7. So in order to increase the percentage of uranium-235 in natural uranium, we have to perform a process called enrichment, and in this enrichment we use centrifuge, or we use the principle of centrifugation. Right? So that is basically the idea where uranium centrifuge comes into the news. So it is already well drafted here that centrifuge is a device that is used for uranium enrichment to extract uranium-235 isotope from a sample of natural uranium. Uranium-235 is a fissile and thus useful to generate nuclear power and to build nuclear weapons. Of course, when it comes to natural uranium, like I said, it contains only 0.7% of fissile uranium, and that fissile uranium is uranium-235. So we have to increase its percentage. And guys, when it comes to enrichment levels, the levels vary in terms of applications. If you are looking to simply generate electricity, then for that we require enrichment levels up to 5%. Up to 5% enrichment levels are enough. 3 to 5% you can say. But when you are looking for nuclear weapons, the uranium enrichment level goes as high as 90%. So 90% for nuclear weapons, and 5% to generate, 3 to 5% to generate electricity. So this is basically the standards that we follow when it comes to uranium enrichment. So we require a centrifuge that is simply meant to increase the composition of uranium-235 up to that percentage. Now, how is this process works? So guys, remember, uranium enrichment is a gas centrifugation. Uranium enrichment is a gas centrifugation. That means when you put the natural uranium into its gaseous form, put it in a centrifuge, the center part will be occupied by the lighter uranium and the periphery would be occupied by the denser uranium. So once you put uranium gases into the centrifuge and start spinning, you will notice that all the uranium-238, which is slightly more denser, it will occupy the periphery, and all the lighter uranium-235 will occupy the center. And once this differentiation is completed, it is passed from one centrifuge to another so that we can further refine the percentage of uranium-235. So this is basically, so this is a simple construction of various centrifuges lined one after the other, because once the uranium passes from one particular centrifuge to another, it gets further refined, further more concentrated, and that's how we reach to an enrichment level of up to 90% as well. So depending on what level of enrichment we require, we would decide how many centrifuges are needed to reach that level of to that level of refinement. So that is the purpose of centrifuge, and this is the reason it was in the news, because nuclear energy itself is quite popular in the news lately. Then guys, next one is the new data keeps search for rare subatomic mystery going. Now this is an interesting news. It came last to last week. In fact, you can see it is the news of 27th of March. Right, it was supposed to be completed in the last week, but I'm covering it right now. The reason is because there was less time, so I'm covering it here today. When it comes to this particular news, the news per se is not very important. I did not find the news very important from UPSC perspective, but in the news there has been a mention of an experiment called AMoRE experiment. AMoRE experiment, and this AMoRE experiment that is going on in South Korea, this is what is relevant from our context of civil services preparation. So you should know what is the full form and what is the purpose of AMoRE experiment. So first, let me talk about what is exactly the AMoRE experiment. So it is called the advanced molybdenum. MO stands for molybdenum here. Molybdenum is an element. MO is the alphabetical symbol for molybdenum. So advanced molybdenum based rare process experiment. Advanced molybdenum based rare process experiment. This experiment is being performed at South Korea, and it has been searching for a neutrino less double beta decay of molybdenum 100, MO100. It's an isotope of molybdenum. So it is basically trying to search for a neutrino less double beta decay of molybdenum 100. Now what is this double beta decay and such? I don't think that is relevant from civil service point of view, but let me tell you what is the purpose of this experiment so that you'll understand the entire purpose of the news and what is the reason why we are covering it. So guys, let me tell you, neutrinos, we have talked about neutrinos in the class discussions very often, especially under the standard atomic model. We know that neutrinos are lepton type particles which fall under the fermion categories of subatomic particles. So fermions are those particles which are supposed to have mass. And when it comes to neutrinos, we know for sure that neutrinos contains mass. Neutrinos have got some mass of its own, but what we have been struggling is to find their exact mass. Exact mass of neutrinos has not been discovered yet. And guys, it is quite an astonishing fact that neutrinos, they are the second most abundant subatomic particle in the universe. If you talk about all the particles in the universe, subatomic particles, that means particles inside an atom in the universe, neutrino happens to be the second most abundant particle. After photons, neutrino is the second most abundant particle in the universe. But unfortunately, we still do not know its actual mass. we know for sure that yes, there is a mass. We know we have a value of difference of the two, square of the two masses. We know the difference of the between the two different types of neutrinos. We know that there are three different types of neutrinos: electron neutrino, muon neutrino, and electron, muon, and tau neutrinos. There are three types of neutrinos, but we still do not know exactly the mass of these three neutrinos, and we know the difference of the square of the masses, but we do not know the exact masses. So the purpose of the AMoRE experiment is to somehow help us find out the exact mass of the neutrinos. Now guys, try to understand, if we do not know the mass of the second most abundant subatomic particle, you can understand there are so many phenomena that may be happening in the universe where neutrinos may be participating, but without knowing its mass, we cannot find out how these processes are occurring, how these other impacts that neutrino may be creating on the universe. There is no way to find out. So it is important to know its actual mass. And guys, you can understand, when we are dealing with something so small, it is ought to have challenges in finding the right solution. So this is one experiment that is going on. Although the experiment has been going on since 2015, but what is to remember that apart from South Korea, there are 8 more countries which have partnered with South Korea, and that includes India, China, Russia, Pakistan, Ukraine, Germany, Thailand, and Indonesia. So remember, India is a partner in the AMoRE experiment, so this is the reason why we are covering it, right? So the main objective of this experiment is to find signals that neutrinos have a different mass structures than other elementary particles, and would provide a measurement of the absolute neutrino mass scale, which is so far have not been found. We have confirmed that there are neutrinos. We know that neutrinos have mass, but we do not know the absolute mass of the neutrinos. So this is something that needs to be found out, and that's the objective of the AMoRE experiment. So I think only this much is enough to understand in this topic. Then guys, a very interesting research has recently being published. It is a research from the 4th Military Medical University in China, and what they have done, guys, they have successfully performed a transplant of a genetically modified pig liver on a person who was diagnosed with brain death. That means the person was already dead. It was declared brain dead. That means the heart was still functioning, and the brain was dead up to an extent that there was no chance of the person's revival. So for this brain dead person, where the heart was still functioning, the doctors performed a surgery where they transplanted the human liver and changed it with a genetically modified pig's liver. And this experiment was successfully performed, and the person was observed for the next 10 days. And after 10 days, he was declared to be heart dead as well. But in that 10 days, the research that was performed, it found out that the liver transplant was successful, and all the necessary bile juices and all the necessary chemicals, or what we can say, that the albumin protein, the liver albumin protein that is secreted from the liver, it was produced by the same genetically modified pig liver as well. So this was an interesting research, and let's read about it. So what basically they did, this kind of transplantation is called xenotransplantation. If you guys remember, we have talked about this in the class as well, xenotransplantation. Now xenotransplant, or we can call it xenogenic transplant, it is the kind of transplant where organs between one species are transplanted into another species. So organs between two different species are transplanted. When you talk about organs of the same organisms, we call it autologous transplant, right? From the same person. So if you take the same person's skin and put it at some other part of the body of the same individual, we call it autologous transplant. Then when you talk about transplanting within the same species, but between individuals belonging to the same species, we call it allogenic transplants, right? Allogenic transplant, it is within the same species but between different organisms, right? So if somebody takes an organ from a friend, from a family member, that is called allogenic transplant. And when it comes to transplanting organs from one species to another species, we call this xenogenic transplantation. So this was a successful xenogenic experiment that was performed, where a transplant of a liver from a genetically modified Bama miniature pig was performed into a person who was declared brain dead. Now, in this particular experiment, when it was conducted, the entire graft functioning, blood flow, immunity, and inflammatory responses were observed for a period of 10 days. And guys, it was found that the liver produced bile as well as the albumin proteins. Porcine albumin means pig albumin, albumin proteins it was able to produce, which is normally produced by the liver itself. But of course, the quantity of the bile and the albumin was not enough, was not matching with the human liver. And the liver does not get rejected, so immunosuppressant drugs were being given into the body so that they can control the immune response of the body, so that the liver is not rejected. And this therapy has been successfully performed for 10 days. And this, of course, does not open the window that now the people who are looking for liver donors, they can take a genetically modified pig's liver. But of course, it opens a way of creating new therapies where we can actually harvest human-like organs from genetically modified pigs. Remember, we call it porcine albumin or the porcine liver, right? That is the pig's liver. If it is taken from cows or buffaloes, we may call it bovine liver or bovine valve and such, which is also a very common therapy, bovine valve and porcine valve, which is basically the heart valve transplantation from pigs and cows. The study was limited to 10 days observation period, and only basic liver functions were measured, right? So remember that liver is a quite complicated organ, so not all the function, but basic liver functions were checked. Advances in the gene editing have made it possible to modify the pig organ to reduce the risk of rejection and improve compatibility with the human recipients. However, the efficacy of the study to aid actual transplant is still indispensable, but an actual porcine liver transplant is a distant dream, considering the complex nature functions of the liver. So the actual transplant is still a distant dream, but it can definitely aid further research. It can definitely aid further research on the subject of porcine liver xenotransplant. I hope all of you guys are able to get it. This is what we have under the recent study. Then guys, now we are starting with the current affairs of this week. So we have Chandrayaan ChaSTE, right? It is called the Chandra's Surface Thermophysical Experiment, right? It is now remember this, it is the first instrument to measure temperatures in situ near Moon's South Pole. First instrument, guys. First instrument across the entire world, right? India is the first country which has been able to test and measure the temperature in situ, on site, near the Moon's South Pole, right? And guys, interestingly, this experiment is also the first experiment where we have been able to go inside the surface of a celestial body and take measurements. Before this, there were two attempts that were made, one by NASA and the other one from European Space Agency, but both these attempts failed. But they were performed not on Moon, but on some other celestial bodies. I've covered that. So scientists use this data to report that water ice is more prevalent on the Moon than expected. So it is from the data of the ChaSTE only. The first mission to successfully penetrate the soil of a celestial body. This is very important, guys. It is the first ever mission, guys, to successfully penetrate the soil of the celestial body to deploy a thermal probe after two previous missions that has fallen short. So two previous missions, one was European Space Agency's and the other one was NASA's probe. But this has been the first successful mission where they have penetrated successfully into the soil of a celestial body and deploy a thermal probe. Now, the previous two missions were European Space Agency's Philae. Philae was actually what happened way back in 2015. European Space Agency reached a comet called Comet 67P, right? Comet 67P, and the name of the probe that was sent by European Space Agency, it was called Rosita. Rosita was the name of the spacecraft, and this Rosetta simply went to the comet, started revolving around the comet. It reached successfully to the comet, but from this particular Rosetta, there was a lander which was detached and it fell onto the comet. The name of the lander was Philae or Philae. Now this lander, when it got detached and fell onto the surface of comet 67P, its positioning was not very stagnant or not very stable, and that is why it had an objective of drilling a hole into the comet and take its temperature, but it was not performed because of its unstable position onto the comet. So guys, it was actually a big achievement because this became the first probe ever to successfully touch a comet, but this particular experiment of the Philae lander failed. Then the second country to try was NASA's USA. NASA launched InSight robotic spacecraft to Mars. It was a spacecraft to study the seismic activities and also penetrate deep into the Mars's surface and take the surface temperature from internal temperature of this Mars. But unfortunately, this experiment also of Mars, it failed, right? It had a self-hammering nail which had the nickname the mole. It was designed to penetrate deep into Mars, but it also failed. So both these countries failed in penetrating deep into the soil of a celestial body and take its temperature. India's ChaSTE mission has successfully achieved it. So the probe is a needle that pushes down until its tip touches the moon's surface. By monitoring the temperature from the sensors at the end of the probe, scientists can identify if it has touched the surface or not. The ChaSTE tunneled into the soil to a final depth of 10 centimeters and then collected the measurements throughout the Chandrayaan 3 mission. I hope you understand. So it went up to 10 centimeters deep into the Chandrayaan, into the moon's soil. Now guys, the next news that was popular in last 1 week, it was undersea cables and its importance. Now guys, we all know that undersea cables are the ones that connects India with the rest of the world, and we are connected with the rest of the world. This class is being this particular lecture is being showcased across the planet only because of there is a strong network of undersea cables taking all our internet connections. But why it was in news? It was basically in news because of the small infrastructure that India has compared to the other countries, right? So, and which makes India more vulnerable to any kind of damages. So guys, I'll just read the important points here. You'll get an idea because this is not technically scientific, but more or less related to geopolitical, geopolitical importance for India. So guys, India is getting a new undersea cable. So firstly, you all understand that India is connected to the rest of the world through undersea optical fiber. So there are undersea optical fibers that connects all the countries with each other. And the network is huge, guys. The network is huge. It is hugely connecting so many countries together. And we all are able to transmit signals so quickly through optical fibers, all because of these undersea cables that connects one country with the other. So there is the news of a new undersea cable link that is being created. It is being set up by Airtel's to Africa Pearl system. So it's basically going to connect Africa and with that of India. And it has investments from Facebook parent company called Meta, adding almost 100 terabits per second of capability of India's international bandwidth, right? 100 terabits per second of speed would be offered by this particular undersea cable. Now earlier in 2025 there was another undersea cable that was landed in Chennai and Mumbai, right? So there was already another undersea cable that was there. Now guys, we all know undersea cables are the ones that connects the internet service providers and telecom operators everywhere on earth. So all of them are connected through undersea cables only. So it is the internet service provider. And remember guys, this is undersea cable is an important part of the infrastructure of internet. So when I talk about internet is basically the network, and that internet infrastructure is basically, so internet is basically an infrastructure that is based on all these undersea cables and all these territorial cables that are connected with the rest of the world. So this is a part of the infrastructure, guys. Now, what is the problem with our undersea cables with that of other countries? The problem is, look at this. 90% of data, 80% of the world trade, and about $10 trillion of financial transaction, as well as secure government information, moves through these cables. So there is no doubt that these cables are very essential, right? Very essential. They all are running through optical fiber cable. So there is no doubt that there is a use of total internal reflection. There is your technology here. But when it comes to India, we have got only two major hubs where the cable landing sites are found. So these are the landing sites from where the undersea cables originate. One is in Mumbai and the other one is in Chennai. In fact, Mumbai operates more than 50% of the India's, undersea cables and high-speed internet. Now the problem is, and when it comes to domestic, we have two domestic cable systems also. One connects Chennai and Andaman Nicobar, and the other one connects Kochi and Lakshadweep. So these are the other two areas also where undersea cables are built. These are domestic connections. But when you talk about the total share of India, remember India often boasts itself as a cyber superpower. The total share of India is presently around only 1% and 3% respectively for cable landing station and subsea cable systems. Just 1%, 3% of the global landing station. In fact, you'll be surprised to know that there are more cable that land in Singapore, a small city state, than they do in all of India. There are more cable that is landing into Singapore than that of all of India. So when you look at this particular figure that Singapore receives more cable landing sites than India, that means India is more vulnerable to any cable cuts. So that means there are less cables that are landing to India, and because there are less cables landing to India, if there is any one cable that gets cut due to some terrorist activity, due to some warfare, or due to any natural calamity, you can easily expect that a major part of the country's internet would be shut down. So this makes India very vulnerable to any kind of disruptions. Like recently there was a disruption at the Red Sea because of the Houthi rebels and such, and this brought down nearly 20-25% of the India's internet. But that did not happen. This basically news talks about if there is a disruption. But yes, there was a disruption of the Red Sea cable, but India was able to safeguard itself because of the routing network that we had. But it still makes us very vulnerable to any such kind of damage to the cables. So this is the importance of the undersea cable, and India have to expand the number of cables landing into our country, so that if there is any disturbance in one or the other cables, the internet of the country in India should not be disconnected to the rest of the world, right? So that's the objective of having the undersea cables. Streamlining regulations, securing these cables is also important. Fishing trawlers break many cables all the time, and India currently does not have the requisite subsea cable repair ships. That is also a condition. So we are mostly dependent on foreign repair vessels. So we should have a subsea repair ships also. We should not be dependent on foreign repair vessels. So that's the basic narrative behind the undersea cables. Now guys, the next news is regarding CAPTCHA. It was a recent news in the Hindu newspaper. So I think this is a kind of news that can be asked in your civil service prelims exams from the topics of everyday life. So let's see. Now all of you know that we have been using CAPTCHA to keep our identities safe, to keep the websites and user data safer, right? Now CAPTCHA stands for completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and human apart, right? So as the name suggests, it is based on the Turing test. Now Alan Turing, you might have heard of him. He basically devised a test to identify whether a response coming online, is it coming from a machine or coming from a human. So CAPTCHA is based on a simple aspect, that how we can differentiate a response of a human or a response of a machine. So one can easily understand that if you write a number and ask a human to perform this calculation, a human may take some time. A machine may also perform a calculation and respond very quickly. But imagine if the number figures are written in a blurred nature, if the figures are written with a lot of blurry lines, then a machine may struggle to actually understand what particularly has been asked. But a human would be able to differentiate easily. Like if there is a word written with a slightly different font, with a slightly curved font, with a slightly overlapping font, a machine may struggle to read it, but a human might find it easy to understand it. So that is what CAPTCHA uses. It basically uses those kind of stimulus that helps us to identify that whether a response is given by a machine or a human being, because a machine would struggle to identify that particular nature of the questions and a human should find it easy to answer. So that's basically is the logic behind CAPTCHA. So this was basically asked, and there was a little history of CAPTCHA that was given in the news. I'll share that history with you. It was first introduced in the early 2000 when internet was very popularly flooded by automated bots. These bots made fake accounts, spam websites, and stole a lot of data. So the objective of the website creators was to keep the website safe from these bots. So the idea is very simple. Users have to solve a distorted text or characters that bots struggle to understand. That's how simple it is. So there would be a distorted text given and users will have to solve that, which bots or other robotic machines would often struggle. These challenges often involve recognizing letters, numbers, symbols that were deliberately messed up so that machines could not parse them but humans could. A CAPTCHA is based on the idea called the Turing test, like I already told you. In 2009, a new way to check if you are a real person called reCAPTCHA came. And under reCAPTCHA, they used to come up with words that were scanned from various books. Like from 2009 onwards, we started seeing a lot of ebooks starts coming up. A lot of standard books were converted into their ebooks format, especially when there was no digital copy available. So they were scanned from their from their normal text into digital text. So a lot of words were there which were not spelled correctly and the scanner could not convert them into an actual text. So those words were picked up and they were put as reCAPTCHA and you were supposed to give the right spelling of that particular word. So that was reCAPTCHA. So it used words from scanned books to verify users. Now there were two advantages. The advantage was that it would stop the bots from faking somebody's identity, and secondly it would also help companies. It also helps organizations and websites to get the actual meaning of the word or the actual spelling of the word which was misprint or misspelled or maybe not clearly visible in a book. So it also helped to digitize printed text. So this basically was the benefit of reCAPTCHA. So when you solve the reCAPTCHA challenge, you were actually helping to digitize books by typing out words that a computer could not recognize, right? And this idea showed how users could come together to help improve digitization of the world's books, right? Business websites use CAPTCHA in contact forms, comment sections, and registration pages to stop bots from spamming, right? As bots get smarter, they can sometimes trick CAPTCHA also. So guys, it's not like CAPTCHA is completely foolproof. They can sometimes trick CAPTCHA as well. And CAPTCHA could also be a difficult thing for people with disabilities. Suppose if somebody is blind, they can't read the CAPTCHA. And if you try to turn on the audio signal also, what if somebody is having a hearing impairment, right? A hearing impairment, they may not be able to listen to the audio CAPTCHA. So this is certain problems that CAPTCHA is not catering to every user's demand, right? It is only helping those users which are able to recognize the CAPTCHA, right? So we have to keep the CAPTCHA more active, more smarter than the bots. So if the bots become smarter to decode CAPTCHA, we have to keep the CAPTCHA much smarter. We have to keep upgrading it so that the bots are never able to overpower, right? So this was basically the concept of CAPTCHA. Now next news is related to de-extinction. Now this is a very interesting news. Of late we have found that a species that was supposed to be extinct for more than 10,000 years has now come back. So there is an American company called Colossal Bioscience, and this company is backed by a certain billionaire, and this company has recently claimed that they have successfully reproduced the American dire wolf, right? American dire wolf. This wolf was predominantly found in the Canadian and American snow covered mountains and glaciers. So this dire wolf was large canines that dominated southern Canada and the US before they went extinct almost 13,000 years ago, right? Now this is the fossilized image of dire wolf, and this is the image of the dire wolf puppies that have been recently born. Now what they have done, guys, here, so let me first talk about that how the dire wolf appears. So dire wolf resemble the grey wolf. Grey wolves are still alive, so you can understand that these are the wolves that would have helped to create the dire wolf DNA. But so they resemble the grey wolf but were larger with white coat. So they were larger than the grey wolf and they had a white fur. A dire wolf could be 3.5 feet tall, more than 6 feet in length, and weighs up to 68 kilograms. That is what the dire wolf. It is much bigger than the grey wolf. So two male pups. The names of these pups are, were born to a surrogate dog mother. So surrogate dog mother was taken. So it was born to a surrogate dog mother in October, and a female called Khaleesi. So two male and one female were born to a surrogate dog mother. But you can understand that from where the DNA of the dire wolf was taken, it was basically taken from a fossil. So the scientists of the colossal bioscience contacted the museums and laboratories for dire wolf specimens and got access to the tooth thought to be about 13,000 years old and a 72,000 year old skull. Inside the skull is the petrous or inner ear bone, which is a good source of well preserved DNA. So when they found the skull, they got the well preserved DNA from the ear bone, the inner ear bone of the dire wolf. And using this genetic data, researchers could confirm that the grey wolf, as well as the closest living relative to dire wolf, they share 99.5% of their DNA code similar. And guys, we call this as phylogenetic evolutionary relationship. We call this as phylogenetic relationship when you are two different species but you share a very similar genetic data. You share a similar DNA, right? Like you can say chimpanzees and humans also have 99.5% DNA similar. That means they both are phylogenetic species, right? So scientists then used the gene editing tool to make 20 unique edits to 14 genes in the grey wolf genome. Of those, 15 were meant to reproduce extinct dire wolf gene variants such as light colored coat. So the white coat, light colored coat, hair length, it has to be longer, and coat patterning so that the coat pattern matches the dire wolf, and then body size and musculature, right? So all these things have been altered with the help of gene editing, right? 20 different gene edits were made to the 14 genes and which changed these phenotypical characters of the grey wolf, and that's how the dire wolf were eventually reproduced. I hope you guys can understand. So this is basically a dire wolf which has been created. The genome has been created in a laboratory by changing the 0.5% of the grey wolf DNA to match the dire wolf characteristics by getting the most preserved DNA samples through a preserved skull, 72,000 years old preserved skull. I hope all of you guys are able to understand. So this is what we have under. And guys, this phenomena of reintroducing extinct species, we call it de-extinction. We call this as de-extinction, right? So de-extinction dire wolf, all of you guys can understand. So now the next topic of discussion is the recent news regarding rare diseases. Now guys, what exactly is a rare disease? This is basically going to be a news in progress. There would be a lot more news that will come up on rare diseases. I would want you guys to keep following it, right? And I will be coming up with some future news also on this. So what exactly is this particular concept? So guys, what is a rare disease? First of all, a rare disease is the one where less than one occurrence per 5,000. So one patient per 5,000 people or less, then only we consider it as a rare disease, right? So guys, Supreme Court has already held, way back in 2015, they have already held that right to health and medical care is a fundamental right under Article 21. It is already withheld by Supreme Court, right? And then, according to the National Policy on Rare Diseases, in 2021, Ministry of Housing and Family Welfare, they published the National Policy on Rare Diseases, which basically provides a comprehensive framework for diagnosis and treatment of rare diseases. Now guys, when it comes to rare diseases, as per this policy, there are three types of rare diseases in India. The first type of rare diseases, this is something UPSC can ask, are those rare diseases that can be treated with a single intervention. That means a single therapy can treat the disease. Sometimes a stem cell transplant therapy, an organ transplant therapy, it can easily help in curing the disease completely. These are called these are basically the first category rare diseases. The second category rare diseases are those which require long-term or lifelong treatment support, but the treatment is low cost, right? So it may require long-term support, but the treatment cost is very less. And guys, according to the National Policy on Rare Diseases, they have suggested state governments to consider supporting patients under second category due to the relatively low cost. State government should take the initiative. And guys, here comes the third category. The third category of diseases are those for which there is a treatment available. There is a definitive treatment available, but the challenge is very high cost, right? High cost and probably a lifelong therapy. So for third category is those categories which have a treatment available, but the challenges could be in patient selection and the cost of the treatment is very high and lifelong support. So guys, when it comes to first and second category, there is no such problem in rare diseases, right? Because the occurrence is less. But when it comes to third category, here we have the biggest challenge. And because the cost of the treatment is quite expensive, this is where the Supreme Court, although the national policy on rare diseases, they have kept a 50 lakh rupees cap. They have kept a 50 lakh rupees of aid for category 3 diseases, right? So guys, there is basically this case of putting a 50 lakh rupees cap that has been part of the national policy of rare diseases. It is yet to be implemented, guys. So on 13th of May this year, Justice P.S. Narasimha is going to, be heading the bench of the Supreme Court, which will decide on the cap of 50 lakh central assistance to treat diseases, whether it would be applicable or when it would be applicable, right? So this particular third category are those for which, according to the policy, there is a cap of 50 lakh rupees assistance that Government of India may offer, right? So this is what is the idea behind national policy on rare diseases. And guys, how many rare diseases have been put in under consideration? There are 63 rare diseases. There are total 63 rare diseases as per the recommendations of Central Technical Committee on Rare Diseases, right? So there are total 63 rare diseases. They have been put under Annexure 2 of the policy. Annexure 1 of the policy, you will see all the center of excellence where people can go and have assistance. And Annexure 2 talks about all the rare diseases which are listed under category 1, 2 and 3. Got it? So this is what we have under rare diseases. And now guys, the last topic of our discussion is regarding the 128 new moons of Saturn that has been discovered lately. So guys, very recently this news has come that Saturn is now having a total of 274 moons, which is highest of any celestial body of any planet in our solar system. In fact, all the other planets combined, Saturn still end up having more number of moons, right? These moons are small, measuring only few kilometers in diameters. So they are not supposed to be very large in size. They are only few kilometers in size, and they are supposed to be fragments of a much larger moon that must have existed, many years ago, but this would have broken apart due to violent collision of some asteroid, of some meteorites and such, right? Now guys, because these moons are found in a certain group, there is a name that has been given. It's called Mundell-Fari group, subgroup of these moons. So guys, remember this particular name, this Mundell-Fari subgroup. It is a name of the sections of new moons that have been discovered around Saturn. It's basically a fragment, smaller fragments of one larger moon, which are approximately a few kilometers in size, right? And guys, this Mundell-Fari subgroup has been officially recognized as new set of moons for Saturn by the International Astronomical Union, which is the international body which is the most reliable, most credible source of any literature as well as any data related to astronomy. So any data on astronomy, any literature on astronomy, it is recorded by International Astronomical Union. It is based in Paris, and they have officially recognized it on 11th of March 2025. Guys, the team of the group of countries that discovered it, it was a team of astronomers from Taiwan, Canada, US and France, and the name of the telescope was Canada France Hawaii Telescope, CFHT, which observed the sky around Saturn between 2019 to 2021 and discovered that there are 274 moons in total. And as per this observatory itself, they have said that Jupiter does not come even closer to this. Saturn finally have the highest number of moons, and it may keep the title forever now in our own solar system. So guys, this concludes our discussion for today's Focus Weekly. I'll be seeing you guys next week and continue to bring you some more content on science and technology. Thank you. All the best.